Principle number one, and the most important thing you have to bear in mind in any endgame, is king activity. The only exception are major piece endgames with queens and rooks on the board, where if your king is active, you're going to get mated. So minor piece endgames, pawn endgames, king activity is key. This position is a great example. It's white to play. White to play. You can win or you can lose in a single move. Obviously, white has a very active king, black has a very bad king, and white to play lost the game in a single move. White played knight e7. And what's the idea behind knight e7? Well, the idea is, I want to checkmate you. I want to go king h6 and then knight f7 checkmate. Unfortunately, black isn't going to play a2, queening the pawn and getting mated. So king h6, I don't know, any random move, f6 and knight f7 checkmate. Instead, on knight e7, black played f6 check, preventing the king from going to h6, because if you go to h6 now, I'm just going to take the knight. So you have to take, king takes f6, and now king h7. And king h7, there are no more mating threats. The king cannot go to g6, nothing can be played anymore. White tried knight f5, a2 was played, black is going to queen, knight g6, and now you have to watch out for one more move as black. Black played knight d4, which is very precise. Why is knight d4 precise? Well, if I take your knight, you're going to lose the game. If I queen, you're going to lose the game, and I'm preventing all possible threats. If, for example, I don't know, knight f8, then king g8, and you either allow me to take, or I take here, or I queen, so you basically lose. So let's go back. Knight e7 was the losing move, and black won very simply with f6, king takes f6, and king h7, and now there was nothing white could have done. Now let's see what white should have done. How can white win this position? Well, by preventing f6 being check, and by preventing king h7. So the correct move is activating your king first, king h6. Whatever black does here, black is forced to resign. If, for example, f6, now we just go knight f7, and after king g8, we go king g6, and I don't know what to suggest. Let's say king f8, I go h6, and I'm going to mate you. Or on king h6, if king g8, which seems promising, then the beautiful knight d7. The king is completely cut off. If you play f6, trying to create a square for your king, then king g6, and once again, it's game over. Knight d4, trying to chase my knight away, but now I play knight h6. King h8 is the only move. Knight takes f6, and the next move, whatever black plays, is going to be knight f7 checkmate. So this may be a slightly extreme position. This is from the game Zakharov-Petrushin, a game I've been analyzing recently, and I think it's a great example of just how an active king can be dominant, even if your opponent has a passed pawn that's about to queen and you cannot stop it. The second principle is having passed pawns is a huge advantage. So this game is very famous. This is Kasparov-Adams from the 2002 Linares tournament. And in this position, Kasparov played an absolutely astonishing move, highlighting just how having a passed pawn is dangerous. Now, why? Passed pawns are future queens, and often, if they are in the center, they require babysitting, and your opponent's pieces are going to have to, well, prevent them from queening. And if they are supported, especially by bishops, if a bishop supports the queening square, then they become deadly weapons. The usual rule is that in an endgame, especially a simple endgame, let's say a king and pawn endgame, you want outside passed pawns. So you want them, let's say, on rook files. Why? Because the opponent's king cannot reach both sides of the board immediately. If you have two passed pawns on adjacent files, and your opponent has pawns on the A file and on the H file, your opponent is just going to win, because their king is going to sit, let's say, on E6, and your king isn't going to be able to stop both pawns. However, with pieces on the board, central pawns are way more dangerous, simply because they tend to split your opponent's position in half, and they tend to act like actual attacking pieces. So, how would you create a passed pawn here? Kasparov played D5. And after d5, there really is no good response. The engine still says equal, but it's very hard to keep that equality. The engine says c takes d5, and black could survive, Of course, white plays c6, but look at this pawn. Look at this. So knight a5 is the best move. Bishop d7. I think I was losing here. According to the engine, this is equal, but it requires 20 precise moves. bc5 loses straight away. We just take on c6, and same thing, except that this pawn is hanging and it becomes easier to queen. In the game, Michael Adams took the rook. So this is the sacrifice Kasparov was offering, and Michael Adams had underestimated it significantly. Now let's watch what happens. Knight takes e5, of course, bishop takes e5. And now what do? I don't know, if you don't take on d5, I'm just going to queen my pawn, or I'm going to take on c6 and queen my pawn. So in the game, cd5 was played. If it wasn't played, then dc and the pawn queens. And then c6 was played. f5 was played, g takes f6, g takes f6, bishop e6, king g7, and bishop g3, and you're not stopping my pawn anymore. You're just not stopping my pawn. Eventually, Kasparov won the game. So after knight e5, bishop e5, the best move was f5, still keeping things sort of equal, but again, very hard for white to play. So creating a passed pawn is something that will give you a long-term endgame advantage. And even if, like, this position is equal according to the engine, but that doesn't matter because we are humans. And after we get a position where white has a pawn on c6, Michael Adams now has to worry about this pawn constantly. If you told him this is equal, that wouldn't help one bit. He would still think he's worse practically, and that's true, because if black makes one mistake, white queens. Despite being the exchange down, it's completely irrelevant. So if you can create a passed pawn, that's a very strong thing to do. Now let's move on to something a bit more complex. Pawn breaks. So what are pawn breaks? You know them from openings usually, and they actually do occur in all three phases of the game. Pawn breaks are a way to change the nature of the position, change the pawn structure, which means that new possibilities are open. And in the endgame, pawn breaks are either very good or very bad, and that's the common rule. So when you play a pawn break, you open up venues for pieces for both sides. This is an extreme position once again. This is a position between Svetin and Gufeld, played in 1969, and it's clear that white doesn't really have a lot of options. So let's say you have to win. Let's say you have to win. First, let's consider the pawn breaks. We have g4, or we have c4, and that's about it. Unless you play one of those two moves, nothing's gonna change, unless black gives up material or you give up a bishop or something. So g4 obviously not good, because black just takes. So in the game, Svetin played c4. And let's look at this astonishing move. Seemingly, the pawn can be taken two different ways, but black ended up ignoring c4 completely. So let's see why. If b takes c4, then king d2. And after rook, let's say rook b8, we now play b3. And we're going to pick up this pawn. And now our bishop is open. We're putting pressure on a6. And again, it becomes way, way harder for black to defend. The king is going to be completely tied down to defending this pawn. So that's what happens on b takes. On d takes, it's much simpler. We just go bishop g2, and black is actually losing straight away, because now not only are we going to take here and maybe here, but we still have b3. And black's pieces are completely buried. So in the game, bishop f8 was played, which is bad. I mean, white is better whatever happens after c4, but bishop f8 is really bad. And in the game, white made a mistake. White played cb5. cb5 is okay, but it's not winning. And he took bishop b5. White took on a3, black took on a3, and after cb5, white eventually won. If you turned on the engine, it's going to say equal, but coming back to the previous chapter on passed pawns, white has a protected passed pawn. This is going to be tough to play. However, after bishop f8, c takes d5 would have been way more promising. Well, why? If you play ed5, then it's clear that after bishop h3, white's pieces are active. This is a passed pawn. Once it moves away, the bishop's going to be active. The king is going to have a way in. So that's definitely not an option. And after cd5, cd5, once again, I have a passed pawn and you can resign. In fact, this is resignable straight away. c6 check. And after king c6, rook a6. And that's it. I'm just going to win everything. I'm going to win every pawn. So c4 is or was the only way to change the nature of the position. In the endgame, look for pawn breaks, even if they seem absurd, even if the pawn can be taken 2 different ways or 3 different ways. Consider pawn breaks, because they are the way to liberate your pieces, they are the way to activate your king, they are the way to create a passed pawn. So 3 main things: activate your pieces, activate your king, create a passed pawn. All that is usually done with pawn breaks. We're going to be testing our positions against Noctie, a human-like AI. I've created themes for all 7 concepts, for all 7 principles, and I'm going to be testing Noctie in some of them. So let's test this position with c4. So I've created these themes on Noctie, and you can access them from the links in the description, or if you want, you can use and create any custom themes of your own. The great thing and the big advantage is that unlike when you play the engine, which is going to play the engine moves, Noctie is going to play like a human, so it may make mistakes. It actually may make mistakes similar to what a human would make in time trouble. So let's practice this position. So I want to win the game, and I'm going to go c4. Now let's see what Noctie does. I've set it up to queen 2. That's a difficulty level. And that should equate to something like 2400 FIDE, but we will see. 2400 FIDE in time trouble. So we've just seen this position when in the game bishop f8 was played. Now still nothing was done about c4, so I'm just going to take and see what Noctie does. Either way, we get a passed pawn now, so the nature of the position has changed drastically. Let's see what happens. Okay, that's interesting. Now we have a passed e-pawn, and I think the best move is bishop h3, and we should claim that diagonal immediately. So I'm okay. Can I play e6 now? e6, bishop g8. Am I going to lose that pawn? Most likely. I can also consider playing f5. That's another pawn break that now became available. I can also consider rook f1 followed by f5, because there's no time to move this bishop, set up a blockade with bishop e6 and prevent f5. So I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to go rook f1. Okay, that's a good move. Another great thing about Noctie is that it gives you immediate feedback. So if you've made a mistake, you're going to know about it. Okay, it wants to play bishop e6, so I have to prevent it. But if I go f5 now, I'm going to have to take with the bishop, because if I take with the rook, then bishop e6. I still think f5 is necessary, and we're going to play bishop takes. Okay, I've broken open the position, and I have a passed pawn. So I would argue that white has winning chances and that white is better. Whether I'm going to be able to win is another question. But, okay, I only have one move. What am I thinking about? I mean, I could have given up the exchange, but I don't really want to go bishop e3 exchanging bishops, because then I would lose my pawn. But now I have all sorts of discoveries. Like I have bishop c8 check followed by rook takes f7. Okay, that's defended. Smart. So I can create a passed h-pawn by playing g4. That's another pawn break. So maybe I switch plans again. g4 takes, bishop takes. Let's say rook g8. I don't have time for h5 immediately. Okay, so I should get my other rook into play first of all. So I'm gonna bring my rook down so that I can eventually double up my rooks. Blue is an excellent move, so I'm really happy. Yeah, I'm just trying to get you to see how these work in practice. Obviously, Noctie is playing really well. All right. I'm gonna try doubling up my rooks because I don't see anything better. I wonder what it does now, because if I do play rook af1, I think I'll be better. It could play bishop g7. I didn't even see that. Bishop g7 just wins the pawn. This is also kind of annoying. Okay. I guess on bishop g7 I need to play e6, so that on bishop d4 I have takes on f7, in which case I really should go rook g2, defends my pawn and prevents that, but it seems that I've made a mistake. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go back and have a hint. So in this position, what does it want to play? Wait, it wants to play e6 straight away? I'm not sure. Ah, okay. Because maybe I have access to a6, so let's try this. That's actually a really good idea. Because when I check the king away on f7, I'm gonna play rook a6, and maybe trading for g3 is good enough. So takes. I guess rook f7. And then can I play rook a6? I think I can. Rook a6, rook g3, I can just... I'm not too convinced. Maybe, since there's no way to defend the a-pawn anyway, maybe I can play bishop f2, but I'm slightly worried about e3. Bishop f2, e3, bishop e1. Maybe that's the way to go. I don't want to lose the g-pawn. No, that's bad. I should have taken on a6. I thought if we trade rooks, I can still take on a6. Oh, but I lose the b-pawn. I'm an idiot. Oh, I didn't have to lose the b-pawn. I could have just taken on a6 and left the bishop on h6. Why did I do that? Yeah, now I'm worse. Now I'm probably losing. How did I lose that game? Okay, it outplayed me. Let's go back. So instead of bishop f2, let's take immediately. And now on rook g3, how do I continue? I don't think I have rook h7. I mean, I probably have enough for a draw. I definitely have enough for a draw. And at this point, I think I would like to go for a draw. I think black is much better. Yeah, okay, so we're gonna draw the game. If king c8, I just go rook a6. Okay, so this was the first position. The next principle is probably the most famous and most important one, triangulation or Zugzwang. So to me, those are very, very similar or even the same thing, because we use triangulation to get the same position we had, but with our opponent's move. And this is by far the most famous example. This is Tal Spassky from 1965 from their candidates match. In this position, Tal played rook to e4, and this was the only move. What Tal can do here is move the rook from h4 to e4, or resign. Why? If the rook moves away from the fourth rank, then king takes pawn. If the king moves away anywhere, then we push the pawn. So in this position, we want to get this position, but with white to move. So what Spassky did is a simple triangulation. He played king d3, king d2, king c3. So let's calculate. King d3, black has to go rook h4. King d2, black has to go rook e4. King c3, black has to go rook h4 and resign, because we now play king d3 again, and it's the same position, but rook e4 isn't playable. So let's see it in practice. King d3, only move. King d2, only move. King c3, only move. And king d3, tile resigns. There are no moves. The engine gives rook takes h5 as the best move, but it doesn't really matter. Whatever you do, you're going to lose. It's just game over. So triangulation is basically putting your opponent in Zugzwang, making them go into a position where they have no good moves. Okay, so you use triangulation to put people into Zugzwang. And technically speaking, you move your king in a triangular pattern to achieve the same position with your opponent's move. There are many examples. This is just my favorite one. The next principle is very simple, very powerful, and yet I've had my students fail positions like this one. I've had very strong players suggest absurd moves here while we were analyzing. So cutting off the king is the most important thing in simple endgames. If you can make sure that your opponent's king cannot approach the position, then technically you're up a king, which means you're winning. So I hope that you can see the only winning move from here. This is just a random position I've set up, so just completely random. The only winning move is rook d1. The only winning move. If you play anything else, let's say f4, then the king comes in. And then you keep pushing, the king comes in. And then you keep pushing, the king blocks the pawn, you're going to lose the pawn. Whatever else you do, if this king comes in front of the pawn or to the back rank, we're going to have a Philidor, we're going to have one of the standard rook and pawn endgames which are a draw. However, once we play rook d1, black resigns. There's no question that there's no hope. There are no moves. There are no candidate moves. There's nothing to be done. We're just going to push the pawn and queen the pawn. Black is going to have to give up the rook. We're going to be a rook up and checkmate. So please, if your opponent's king is far away from the action, always consider cutting it off first. Always. The next principle is just as important, but it comes up way more often. You don't usually have a chance to cut your opponent's king off, but with rooks behind passed pawns, you sometimes do have a choice. And I actually made a mistake in one of my games about 2 years ago, and I drew a position I could have won. So this position is a draw. This position is winning for white. The only difference is that white's rook is behind the pawn and not in front of it. When the rook is behind the pawn and the pawn advances, your rook gains scope. So as the pawn moves, your rook gains scope. When the rook is in front of the pawn, when your pawn advances, your rook loses scope. And it actually cannot move without losing the pawn. So this is a very famous position, and it's well known that, for example, if black moves away from the two safe squares, white is winning. So for example, if king f7, we win with rook h8, and once the pawn is taken, we play rook h7 check. Or if for some reason black moves away from the second rank, we win easily with rook f8 check, and we're just gonna queen. However, if black stays on these two squares, there's nothing we can do. The best thing we can hope for is getting the king over here, but once we do, the rook starts checking. Now again, this is a very extreme example, and you're gonna have subtler examples of why having a rook in front of the pawn is bad. Now let's look at this position. The rook is behind the passed pawn. How do we win? Well, we just get the king to b7 and black resigns, and that's it. Black's rook is in Zugzwang. Black's king doesn't have time to approach, even if it did. Like, let's say the black king got here. Well, we just do this and take all the pawns and win. So game over. Now let's try this out against Noctie. I've actually created a slightly more complex position. As you can see here, I've added 2 more pawns to make it a bit more complicated. and to make things more interesting. So let's practice this against Noctie. So I've input some notes over here. Once you click on the links to the themes, you'll be able to read all this stuff. So I'm going to try to win by, of course, getting to b7 or b6 and queening my pawn. But before I do that, let's try to complicate things a little bit. Okay, this is a bit dubious because now the 7th rank is open. So now I think I'm just going to approach and try to get to b6. The pawn can never be taken because I play rook g8 check. Okay. Okay. I guess pawn takes. So now I wonder if playing a rook e8 is good enough. Rook e8, rook a7 is forced. Rook e6. There's rook a2, and on rook e4 there's rook h2, and that's a dead draw. So not that. But I have to approach the pawn. So I wonder if I can play rook king b4. The rook moves, I approach this pawn. So I'm gonna try that. Yes! Okay, now I have to approach, but I'm gonna chase the rook away once more. Okay, now I'm in the square of this pawn and I'm gonna win the pawn. I don't think there's a way for Noctie to stop me from doing this. And if my king picks up all the pawns, I think I'm winning. Okay, I am playing relatively quickly. Okay, now black isn't in Zugzwang technically, because black has h7, g7, so now I need to find a move. Otherwise black is just gonna wait. So let's look at the same variation again. Rook e8. I should mention that this starting position was also a draw. So I've given Noctie a queen 2 or queen 3, so 2400 or 2600. It should not make serious mistakes. So let's see, rook e8, rook a7, rook e6, rook a2, king e3 draw. 2 to 1 is a draw. So I cannot do that. So I need to come up with a move. Having a g pawn or an h pawn doesn't mean anything. It's just drawn. So yeah, I don't know. There's nothing I can do unless I play rook e8. I want to see if Noctie makes a mistake. Okay, it's not gonna make a mistake, so I'm gonna try this. I don't have any other options. Oh, now I lose the h4 pawn as well. Okay. Yeah, I messed this up. I mean, I didn't mess it up. It was a draw anyway. I could have tried king takes here, I guess. And then I don't lose this pawn with check, but it's still a draw. Yeah, I don't have a way to defend this. The best I can do... Well, this is bad? How else am I supposed to defend my h pawn? Yeah, unfortunately, this is a draw. So what you can do against Noctie is practice complex endgames like these, and playing these out against the engine is way less valuable because the engine is going to play all perfect moves. You can set up Noctie to any difficulty, so just create a theme, give it a PGN or whatever, add an element, and then you can choose, let's say I import this PGN. You can choose the difficulty. So from like knights and pawns, which is no rating at all, you can go all the way up to queen 4, which is about 2800 FIDE. So adjust the difficulty, test it on different difficulties if you want to. And as I said, a great way to practice complex endgames. Okay, let's go back to the video. And the final principle is exchanging pawns or exchanging pieces. In other words, when should you exchange pawns? When should you exchange pieces? Now, once again, this is a position from one of my training games. And this is actually a game I played against myself. And I boldly agreed to a draw here against myself. Now, to me, this was an easy position to understand, but when I was looking at this position with one of my students, the first thing he had suggested was knight takes bishop, saying, well, the pawn endgame is a draw. Okay, the principle is this. If you're up material, you want to keep pawns on the board in the endgame. Why? Because having pawns gives you winning possibilities, gives you the option to queen. If you are down material, you want to trade the pawns. If there are no pawns on the board, or black is left with the one extra pawn, whichever one, you can sacrifice your minor piece for that pawn. Also, if you're up material, you want to trade pieces. If there are no pieces on the board, a 4 against 3 king and pawn endgame is almost always a win. If you're down material, you never want to trade pieces. Never. Just in principle, you never even consider knight takes bishop here, unless you can win material. And let me show you those principles in practice. So knight takes c4 loses very simply. Pawn takes, I don't know, c3, king d5, and that's it. Let's say king f4, e6. Now what do you do? The engine says minus 40 after king g5. And I just go king e4, and that's about it. If you try moving towards my pawns, I'm gonna queen, and you're gonna be hurt. So knight takes bishop, black is a pawn up, black has more tempo moves. You don't need to calculate anything. Now let's look at the correct way to play. So we want to keep the pieces on the board, and we want to exchange pawns. I purposely chose a position in which black couldn't initiate piece trades, because they want to, but I cannot because they have a light squared bishop. So how do we trade pawns? Well, we need to trade all of them. We have two pawn breaks. One of them is g4, the other one is c4. We're not playing c4 because the bishop's on c4, but we can exchange this one. And then in the endgame, when we talked about passed pawns during the second principle, we know that an outside passed pawn is very dangerous. So let's say if we put this pawn on a7, black would be easily winning because we couldn't stop this pawn. Also, if this pawn was over here, it would be harder for us to draw. So, luckily, once we exchange this guy, it's going to be an easy draw. So what do we play? King f4. It doesn't matter what black does here. It's completely irrelevant. g4, the pawn is going to be traded, and now it becomes simpler. Our next goal is to prevent any pawn breaks by black unless they trade material. So in other words, if c5 happens, we want our knight defended, and also we want to defend this pawn because taking would give our opponent two connected passed pawns. There are a few more things, a few subtler things you have to consider. Don't give your opponent connected passed pawns, but essentially once we reduce the material down, it becomes easier to play. If you're down a pawn, a 4 to 3 is hard to draw, a 3 to 2 is easier, a 2 to 1 is easy, and 1 against 0 is just an automatic draw. Okay, so these are the most important 7 endgame principles I wanted to show you. I hope you like them. Let me know what you think, and stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.